Today we're gonna get this handle bedded in epoxy. So I'm gonna cut on this side of the line, the blade side of the line, and that'll make it so this piece is just ever so slightly shorter than this piece, like I was talking about, by about a bandsaw blade thickness. All right, that line looks good. Time to cut it in half. Oh yeah, that's nice. That's just a tiny bit longer than the other one. That's exactly what I wanted. Since we went to a lot of extra work to make the sides nice and parallel, I'll be able to clamp these in the milling machine vise and mill off these rough cut ends and get it all nice and flat. And it's just gonna make life so easy having those nice flat spots to clamp to. Okay, so I'm gonna do that trick where I put this in the vise and use the level to get it lined up with the vise just right. But before I do that, it's got some little ridges and stuff on it, so I wanna just knock those down a little bit. I don't wanna do it on the grinder because I don't want it to start changing the angles. Just so you can see what I'm talking about, what I'll do is just kind of mark over the end of this with a pencil. And then after I sand it just a little bit, you'll be able to see really clearly the ridges that I was talking about that I kind of wanted to flatten down, just so the level sits on it flatter. Don't have it yet. Oh, that vibration. Don't use a hammer to bump things around, use a parallel jaw. Okay, is that accurate? Yep, looks good to me. Okay, so delicious. The handle's cut in half, and I just put a little mark right here, and we'll go ahead and start making the middle spacer. It's gonna be a 1/4 inch spacer like the front spacer, only it fits right up to the middle here. So we'll go ahead and start making that, and then seeing how it all fits together after that's in there. Drive a line. I got the part milled, so now we need to fit it up to that line. It needs to go all the way up to that line and then maybe just a tiny bit past the line. Got some filing to do because that's as far as it'll go so far. I got this fitting up on the tang where it needs to go, and now it's time to surface grind it. I decided to go ahead and surface grind the pommel while I'm over here, and I have the surface grinder already going. It's important for me to surface grind the pieces so they'll be nice and flat and everything will fit up nice and tight. I like to make little marks on my parts so I know which way they go on every time. Until I get the lineup pins in there, the parts could possibly go on the wrong way or something and they won't fit as good. So I put a little mark with a punch. Sometimes I'll put like 1 dot or I'll put 2 dots or something. It just depends on how many parts there are all in one place. That normally signifies that the part goes forward where the dot is, and normally the dot is on top. If you end up using a system where you make like a little dot, make sure that you kind of do the same thing every time, otherwise you might put the part the wrong way. I'm trying to put it the right way. I'm just sanding off the little bit of raised metal with the punch left. Nice and flat, make it flat. So the next thing I need to do on this knife is start working on getting the threads on the end of the tang, because once that's done, we can actually start fitting everything together in its final configuration. So what I've done here is marked a line where I want to cut the tang off, and I've squared it up really well with the end of this handle material. That way, grind to that line, I'll be able to take my square and have a nice square line to go by for making the threaded part of the tang. Yeah, you go ahead and start grinding this, grind down to this line. The reason why I wanted this to be nice and square with the end of the handle. Oh, is it? Hang on. Yeah. So the reason I wanted the tang to be nice and square with the end of the handle was so I could mark the center. So the center is right there on that black mark. That's the center of where the tang comes out, in between the ivory, the core of the ivory. And then I want my pommel nut just above center a little bit, because if it's below center on the handle, like if the pommel nut's down here below center, the knife will look really, really weird and won't look good. It'll look slow and just awkward. But if you put the pommel nut above center a little bit, it'll look really good and fast, and it'll just look really good. So you either want the pommel nut centered or above centered a little bit, and I like to go above centered. So I put a little mark over here that's just above center. Getting back to why I wanted this perfectly parallel and flat with the end of the handle was so I could put a square on here and have a nice square line that I can go off of for making the threaded end of the tang. And I want the threaded end of the tang nice and square with the end of this handle, because if it's not, the pommel nut would be like tipped one way or the other, and I'd have to like grind the ivory one way or the other. And it may be a little bit off. I might have to adjust the ivory a little bit, but you want to get it as close as possible. I want the threads to go to about there, so I'm going to probably grind it back a little bit further. Probably grind it to about there. I'm going to put 1/4 inch threads on this, so I want to mark a 1/4 inch wide spot. There's 1/4. I can put the square back on here maybe. Well, the first line's good. Don't follow the second one. I've got something here that might seem kind of intimidating, and that's getting this threaded bolt-like thing going on at the end of the tang. That used to be really scary for me, so for years, I used to pin on a bolt on the end of the tang and have it kind of pivot, but I don't like doing that anymore just because I feel like this is probably a bulletproof way to do it. So basically you take a 1/4 inch bolt or whatever bolt that you're gonna emulate on the end of your tang and just measure it. This 1/4 inch bolt comes out to be just under 1/4 inch. So all you really need to do to thread this is get that measurement approximately the same and just kind of shape it into a round rod that's just under 1/4 inch thick. Right here I'm a little bit thinner than the actual bolt by just a few thousandths. Yeah, it's within about 5/1000ths of an inch to what the bolt is there. The sides are a little thinner because the tang's thinner, but that's okay. We just won't have deep threads on the sides. There'll be more than enough threads on the top and bottom though to make it nice and strong. So this should be ready to start threading. And then if you start threading it and it just won't go any further because there's like a wide spot, you can take it back over to the grinder and just touch up that spot until you get the whole thing threaded the way you want it. I got the threads cut in on the end of the tang. And something I like to do to get rid of all the little burrs, there's a bunch of little burrs from cutting in the threads, so I like to run over it with a wire wheel, and it helps clean the burrs and stuff off. Here we go. Pretty threads. All ready for pommel nut application. Ooh, nice. Oh, that feels good. I like that. I like that a lot. So the threads are a little shorter than the threaded part on here, but that's fine because when we put it all together, the pommel nut will probably go to about right there. So there'll be a little extra thread left on this and a little extra thread left in the pommel nut inside. So one of the things we need to do now is drill a little spot where the pommel nut can go in there, because right now this pommel nut is wider than the handle material. So I need to mark a spot where we can open that up a little bit. Right there. I'll probably use a milling bit and just mill it out a little bigger than I need. Need to go, looks like we need to go down about a 1/2 inch. Here we are. Got the handle all fit up. This is the first successful fit up and it looks good so far. I think we're pretty much ready to start doing lineup pins. Need to put lineup pins in the front spacer in the front of the handle, going through the middle spacer and the ivory pieces, and then in the pommel into the ivory as well. That'll make it so when we put it together and take it apart, it goes back to the exact same location every time. So the lineup pins index all the parts together. I had to make the base of my pommel nut a little bit smaller. It was fitting too tight into the pommel and it was making it so I couldn't cinch down and get it tightened. I also had to shorten the pommel nut just a tiny bit. But yeah, it's going together really sturdy. The first successful fit up, and I didn't have to adjust angles on anything. Like everything fits up super tight. That could change when we put the lineup pins in there, but it shouldn't change. It should all still fit up really tight. The way I like to do these handles and regular handles that aren't cut in half is to start at the front. So I start with the front spacer and I do the lineup pins in that, and then I move to the middle, or if it doesn't have the middle, then I move to the back. That helps me get everything fitting up really well. If I started at the back and worked my way forward, chances are stuff wouldn't line up properly and it wouldn't fit well and everything in the end. So start at the front, work the way back. So I'm gonna use 1/16 inch hardened 52-100 dowel pins for the lineup pins in this handle. And the way I like to drill these holes is to start with a drill bit rather, that is undersized just a little bit. Just in case it wobbles, I don't want the hole to be too big. So I'm gonna use a number, I believe this is a number 53 drill bit, which is like somewhere right around 58 59 thousandths of an inch. Next up in my drill bit arsenal is a 1/16 inch drill bit. I'll use that after the smaller number 53 drill bit. And that a lot of times makes it so the pin fits in there really snug, but sometimes the pin fits in there too snug with that. So in those cases, I run through it with a number 52 drill bit, which is like 1.5 thousandths larger than the 1/16 inch diameter bit, and that'll make it so the pin fits in there a lot looser. And sometimes it's too loose with that. Sometimes you just gotta play it by ear to get just the right tension in your lineup pin. Yeah, so this is like just barely 1/1000th of an inch oversized over a 1/16 inch. Something else to take into account is the drill bits, as you use them, will start to dull and they'll start to wobble a little bit more. So at first, when this 1/16 inch drill bit made a hole that was really tight for your pin, after you use it a little bit more, it might actually become a hole that's kind of loose for your pin. So it's kind of this dynamic thing that's always changing and always keeps you on your toes to get the perfect 1/16 inch hole that is just has the right amount of tension for your lineup pin. Something else to note is I pretty much only use cobalt bits, cobalt or solid carbide, but I only pull out the solid carbide if I'm in a bind, like I need to drill through something and I keep messing up these bits because whatever I'm drilling in is too hard. So yeah, pretty much all my main using bits are cobalt, split point. I think they're 118 degree split point drill bits. And that goes for my large bits and my small ones.
Cobalt's a brand, isn't it?
No, well, it is a brand.
Like when you said cobalt, that's the first thing that came in my head.
So when I say cobalt, I'm not talking about the brand cobalt. I'm talking about the coating. They're like, they have a cobalt coating on them, and I find those drill bits to be really, really good. I mean, the only thing that I've found that works any better is, like I said, solid carbide if you're just in a really, really tough pickle and you gotta drill something this hard. Here's a nice little trick that I like to use to get rid of this burr created from drilling holes. Like there's a bad burr on one side, then there's a tiny burr on the entry side. I keep one of these on my workbench all the time, this long, I think it's a 1/4 inch drill bit, just because it's easier to hold on to. And I like to use this to deburr my holes. Works really, really well. Little trick I picked up from Ron Newton. Because they have tools that are made for doing this, but he liked using a drill bit better because it was faster and cleaner and just worked better and stuff, and I like doing it too now. And now for the secret weapon. Basically we need to fasten this front spacer to the piece of handle material so we can use the holes in the front spacer to guide the holes into the handle material here. So how do we hold this against here and be able to take this apart and have it all one assembly? Super glue and accelerant. Secret weapons that I use all the time, and they're not secret because I talk about them a lot actually. So what I'm gonna do is put the handle together and then we'll super glue the front spacer to the front piece of handle. And we'll be able to take it off and drill holes into the handle material using the holes that are already existing in the front spacer. That plan may have just backfired on me because some of the super glue just ran down and stuck to the guard, so I might not be able to get the front spacer off without breaking it off of the ivory anyway. We've got our holes drilled in here already. All I'm gonna do is use this as a template to drill into the ivory, and everything will line up nice and solid. Once you get the holes drilled, all you gotta do, tap it off, clean off all this excess glue, and then I can go ahead and drill these holes the drill bit size larger, or 2 sizes if I need it to get my pins to fit nice and snug. So I like my lineup pins to fit really snugly. This is a little too loose. If I can take them in and out by hand, I like to actually have to tap them in with a hammer. So one way you can remedy that is by using a little ball bearing. I can pick it up. So I got a little ball bearing. I'm just gonna stick it on the hole, and then I take a punch, lightly hit it a couple times. In this case, the other hole needs touched up too. And then I do it on the other side as well. That actually pushes a little tiny bit of metal back into the hole and makes it so the pin will fit really nice and tight. In fact, you can get the pin to fit super tight or just a little bit, depending on how much you hit it. So now the pins should fit really tight. Sometimes they fit too tight and you actually have to go back through there with a drill bit again. Hard to get it started. Yeah, that's just about the right tension that I like. It might seem a little tight, but once you take those pins in and out a couple times, they'll loosen up a little more. Oh yeah, fitting good. Time for the pommel. So there's gonna be an issue with the pommel. With the spacers, I could just drill holes all the way through because you're not gonna see the end of it, but with the pommel, you can't just drill your holes all the way through. So, to get the lineup holes to match on the pommel and on the handle material, you have to use some kind of in-between metal spacer like this. This is a spacer that I've got some little holes drilled on the sides and then a big hole for the pommel nut. What I'll do is super glue it onto the pommel, drill my holes into the pommel, and then take this off, clean the super glue out, put some little pins in there, and pin it to the pommel, and then put that assembly onto the blade and super glue it on there, and then take the pommel off, and you'll be left with this super glued onto the ivory. I'll have a guide to match up the holes that are on the pommel with the ivory using this little spacer thing. Loosening pommel nut, adjusting pommel, tightening pommel nut just a little bit, looking at pommel, moving it a little bit, tightening pommel nut, checking to make sure handle is centered. Handle is centered. Super gluing pommel assembly. Now we can take the pommel nut out, and since the pommel is just pinned to that little spacer thing, it should come off with no problem. And now I have a nice pattern on here that I can use to drill the holes. Tightening vise, moving table, leveling ivory, tightening vise, taking level off, setting level down. So now I want to bed the ivory in epoxy. So we're going to take it apart and cover any parts that we don't want sticking together with Vaseline. Fill the ivory sections up with epoxy and let it set up. I'm using West System epoxy here. Some super high quality stuff, like the best quality epoxy that I know of for doing this kind of thing. It takes a long time to set up. I have the regular speed one, so I think it takes 12 to 18 hours or so, I think, to really get fully hardened. You want to mix it up really, really, really well, like for a couple of minutes. It's not as forgiving as like the cheap 2-part epoxies. Something else interesting about this one is you got to measure out the parts perfectly. And it's like 5-to-1 or 4-to-1 or something, hardener and then resin. You can also add colloidal silica into it, which is this fine fibrous powder, and it's kind of like putting rebar in concrete. I'm not going to do that because I'm just trying to make it so the ivory pieces fit onto the tang absolutely perfectly. I'm not trying to necessarily epoxy anything together. Okay, I'm going to call that good. You know what, I think I am going to go ahead and put a little bit of colloidal silica in there. Just a little bit. There we go, just a little bit. Plug that in. All right, now we clean it up a little bit. Just a little bit because everything's covered in Vaseline anyway. Mostly around this pommel nut when you get it cleaned up. And at this stage, there's a lot of shaping and stuff to happen on the blade or on the handle still, so don't really need to worry about leaving a mess on it too much. There she is. Now normally with handles that are one solid piece, I like to take the ivory off as soon as the epoxy starts to get hard, but not when it's fully hardened. That way I won't get stuck on there accidentally. But since this is in a bunch of little sections, I'll just let the epoxy fully harden before I worry about taking the handle off, because it shouldn't be a problem. Shouldn't be, he says. Yeah, that's it. I'm just gonna put a little WD-40 on the blade so it doesn't rust or anything while this is drying, and go from there. I'm a bad boy. Taking a perfectly good piece of ivory and just like, making 2 little chunks. Some consider to be unnatural. What is that from? Oh yeah. Episode 3. The original episode 3. I mean, the chronological episode 3. No, not the chronological. Episode 3, just episode 3, not episode 6, or episode 2. Do other people find that funny, or is it just me? That looks a good to me, yeah? Okay, so I can't say queso naturally anymore because every time I start to say it naturally, I start to think of so delicious. And then it messes up the second half. That's the way.
I like it.
What are you laughing at? What are you laughing at? I'm gonna stop talking now. Not quite, but close enough. Whoa. Oh, it took all the lung out of my ear. So then, yeah. Ow. 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 Little 1/8" pins hurt when you jam them into your fingers. Oh my darling. Everything's getting covered in Vaseline.